Good morning. You can ignore all that. The only thing that is important about me, that you should know about me, is that I am human. It's the only thing. And as a human, I am grateful for you being here, and I'm grateful for the IDEO organization to invite me here to share my views. I also apologize. I define myself, in addition to being human, as a radical globalist. So you would think I would be multilingual, and I am not. I am working on my Spanish, but it's not quite where it needs to be. So I apologize that this is not in Spanish. I want to start with a compliment. Frederico, at one point in his talk, went over and touched this, right? This arguably is one of the most important things we can do as a society, which is to separate facts from fiction. There is way too much fiction going on, not just in Argentina, but in the world. And facts are a perfect bridge for the theme of my talk today. La verdad, is that how you say it? Pretty good? La verdad? The truth. So there was a very wise man many centuries ago who said, "The truth will set you free." And I think the truth is we all seek freedom. We seek freedom from the divide in our countries, plural. We seek freedom from the confusion, from the dysfunction, from the paralysis. We all seek the same thing, which is freedom. But there's a complexity to the freedom, to getting to that freedom, that I can't get to in the next 20 minutes. I can't give you freedom. So the only thing I can really do is try to shine a little light on a little pathway that might actually help you get to where it is you're trying to get to. That's all I can do. So I want to start, in the spirit of truth-telling, with a couple of fundamental truths. And the truth is, whatever you are trying to do, whether it's improve the situation in your country, improve the performance of your company, improve the reality of your family, improve the integrity of your relationship with your partner, whatever it is you are trying to do, the most important competency to develop is your understanding of human behavior, beginning with your own. And the crazy thing is, we choose not to look at our own behavior. And the crazier thing is that human behavior is the base level function that informs all actions, all decisions, and all consequences. I was watching the behavior of the audience during the talks. 35% of the audience was exhibiting not great behavior. And you know what that not great behavior was? Anybody? They weren't listening. They weren't listening. So if you want to fix whatever it is you're trying to fix, I'm going to argue the most important truth is to get really good at understanding your behavior, my behavior, their behavior, and figuring out ways to motivate the right behaviors versus the wrong behaviors. I mean, any organization, this room is an organization, a country is an organization, is nothing but a collection of people. And its capacity to create value, to thrive, to achieve prosperity is a function of the behaviors of the organization. But if we don't acknowledge that, we don't accept that truth, we push behavior over here and we focus on things and functions and technologies without an examination of the behavior, we will fail. You know, they say the definition of insanity, you know this? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Doing the same thing over and over again is a behavior. It's a bad behavior. Oops, let me go back. So the other truth I want to share, I've been speaking around the world on various topics, but ultimately it's about humanity. There is, and I think you all know this, there is a silent global innovation arms race happening right now. Virtually every country with a brain understands that they have to move faster at their capacity to innovate. And there's something called the Global Innovation Index, created about 7 years ago, joint venture between Cornell University and several other organizations. How many are familiar with the Global Innovation Index? Raise your hand. Oh, interesting. So the not so good news, this is the top 25. Argentina is not on the list. America, interestingly, is number 6, not number 1, even though we think we're number 1. But if you go further down the list, you may not be able to read this. Argentina is number 80, behind Jordan and just ahead of Jamaica. That's not okay. And one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later, in order to change your behavior, you have to need to change your behavior. Wanting to change your behavior is not going to change your behavior. You have to need to change your behavior. I said to somebody earlier, if Argentina was being invaded right now, nobody would be looking at their phones. Right? If there was a foreign, whatever, country invading us or aliens were coming in, we were in desperation mode. We had to come together to solve the problem. Nobody in the room would be looking at their phones. Because we have a need to solve the problem. My hope is that this ranking is a need. Like, this is not acceptable. Here's the good news in that ranking. I think it's kind of full of shit. I actually don't think this is really about innovation. I think the ultimate winners in the race are not going to be the ones that innovate the most. They're going to be the ones that understand humanity the best. Because this is the crazy, crazy truth. 75% of startups in the world fail. 84% of digital transformation fails. Last 10 years in the United States, $1.3 trillion was spent on digital transformation by big companies. $900 billion was determined to be a waste of money. 95% of corporate innovation fails. The reason why this stuff fails is because it's not that they can't build the thing or create the technology or develop the app. It's because they can't figure out how to get the humans to behave differently to adopt the thing. It's a behavioral issue. It's not an innovation issue. So if you want to win the race, recognize this is what the race is actually about. It's not about innovation. It's about how do we change our individual and collective behaviors to realize the full potential of our society. And the operative piece in that is we. We. Not you, not me, not I. We. Anybody know Maslow? How many of you know Maslow? Okay, the ones that haven't raised your hand, you should read a little bit about Maslow. This is the guy in the 50s who came up with this construct called the hierarchy of need. And his whole point is that the nature of man is really primal, really basic. That we make our decisions, we take our actions, we exhibit the behaviors that line up with this hierarchy, beginning at the bottom, physiological. We need food, we need water, we need shelter. And then you move to safety and control. And then eventually, maybe someday you get to self-actualization. But the funny thing is, even though you all represent the top X% of Argentinian society or economy or whatever, you're all primal creatures worrying about where you're going to sleep tonight, how you're going to, make sure you get your paycheck. The orientation of you is fundamentally basic. And one of the truths in this hierarchy is that all of you hate change. You talk about change, you talk about the future, you talk about whatever, but at the end of the day, you want to maintain the pattern of your life. Even if the pattern of your life is creating not what it is you want. It's kind of crazy. To the point that these behaviors, these change-averse behaviors, these primal behaviors, these selfish behaviors are killing us. And I'm talking about the United States. 25% of college kids in the United States are on some sort of antitropic drug, anxiety or depression. 40% of Americans are obese. I think that's underreported. 1 in 4 Americans are lonely. I also think that's underreported. Loneliness, turns out, is not just a social epidemic, it's a health epidemic. It's equivalent, being lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So this is the holy shit. What kills countries, what kills economies, isn't necessarily externalities like lack of capital or competition. It's internalities, it's behaviors. What kills families are behaviors. What kills companies are behaviors. And yet we choose to ignore that truth. This slide used to say the wrong behaviors are killing you, and then I thought that was offensive. So I changed it to hurting you. But they are. Pick your verb. They're not helpful. Somebody said to me at breakfast today, you know, if we could just start meetings on time, we might actually become a higher performing country. There's something to that. There's an accountability to that that might be worth looking at. The other thing I would do if I were you, and by the way, in preparation for this talk, I've been trying really hard to figure out what would I do. This is not a frivolous talk for me. This is a really important talk because not only am I here to help you, I think we need to help everybody. Because every country out there kind of sort of has some behavioral issues. So what would I do? I would go backwards in order to go forwards. Crazy, I know. Go backwards. What does that mean? Go back into history. History is a wonderful resource. But the irony, George Hegel, 18th century philosopher, said this. This is a behavior issue, right? We learn from history that we do not learn from history. And yet history is a wonderful resource. Now the good news is there's this guy named Sir John Glove, who's a British citizen, whatever, and he studied empires. That was his thing, studying the rise and fall of empires. And he determined that every empire since the beginning of empires, Mayan, Incan, Assyrian, you name them, Roman, every empire lasts about 250 years. The power period is about the same period. And the reason for that is because they all ultimately exhibit the same bad behaviors. Let me explain. The arc, there's an arc, the rise and the fall. Every empire, this applies to companies too. Arguably it applies to individuals. The age of pioneer, everybody's together, right? We have a vision. We're willing to sacrifice. We're willing to compromise. We're willing to collaborate. We're willing to get over our differences. We're willing to do whatever we need to do to get to wherever it is we're trying to get to. We are pioneers. And then we acquire. We grow. In today's world, I think this is like we don't acquire, we don't take over countries, but we affect relationships with countries, co-opetition kinds of things. Look at the US and China right now. And then things start stabilizing, the age of commerce, and then the age of affluence. This is like the beginning of the end, where all of a sudden a divide emerges. There are havers and there are have-notters. In the age of affluence, this happens. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the age of affluence silences the voice of duty. The object of the young and the ambitious is no longer fame, honor, or service. It is cash. The age of affluence followed by the age of intellect. This is where we start thinking we've got it all figured out, and we start gazing at our belly button. And then the last age or stage is the age of decadence. The United States is in the age of decadence. I'm not kidding. If you read Glob's piece, it's a 30-page piece, I highly recommend it. The characteristics of the age of decadence, we are exhibiting full force. We are at the end of our run. We are at the end of our 200-year run. There's data to prove this. I won't belabor it, but this is what happens in the age of decadence. The big one for me is self-serving replaces self-sacrifice. Selfishness replaces self-sacrifice. I jumped to the conclusion, if we want to change the outcome, we have to change our behaviors, and one of the most essential behaviors to change is to move from caring about you, or even caring about your company, to caring about the whole. The question is, where are you in this arc? Where is Argentina in the arc? And I thought about this and thought about it and thought, and ultimately I decided it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are in the arc. What matters is how you go forward. And my view of how you go forward in a weird way is back to the future. In the turn of the 20th century, this was a land of pioneers and a land of prosperity. 12th largest GDP in the world, higher than Spain's. Let's go back to the future, to that time of pioneerism. And I argue, terrible PowerPoint slide. I think in today's world, every country needs to be a pioneer. That the only way you survive, no, I'm not talking about thriving, surviving, is by being a pioneer. So what do pioneers exhibit? What are the behaviors? What are the 5 key behaviors of pioneers? Number 1, they look forward. They don't look down and they don't look back. They don't bemoan, they don't complain. They're out there. We're going out there. Interestingly, America used to look forward. Now it looks back. Make America great again? What is that? Back. France used to look backwards, now looks forwards under Macron. You can argue with what he's trying to do, but I think he's trying to do this. I was in Kenya a couple weeks ago. They used to look down. They didn't look back, they didn't look forward, they looked down. Now they're looking forward. And so the question for you all is, are you looking forward? Are you acting as pioneers? The president of the chamber last night talked about the importance of this group being leaders. My challenge is be leaders as pioneers and craft a vision for the future that you can all work towards. The United Arab Emirates has something called the Strategy for the Future. Sweden has something called Agenda 2030. What's the plan, man? And how bold is it? What's the equivalent of the American dream that you all want to create? What is the Argentinian dream? This is kind of complicated, but you hate, again, nobody wants to change their behavior. And we will only change our behavior when we have to change our behavior. So even if you have an amazing vision, you have the Argentinian dream determined, the problem is most of you won't change your behavior. So you've got to find what I call shared adversity. And it's based on this simple idea. There are only 2 motivators of change: aspiration and desperation. And the problem is desperation is really the only one that works. I use an example of I've been wanting to lose 10 pounds for 5 years. This is true. 5 years, 10 pounds, 5 kilos, 4 kilos, I don't know. And I go to the doctor, and the doctor says, Chris, if you don't lose 10 pounds, you're going to double the risk of a heart attack. I lose 10 pounds by Monday. So we've got to find sufficient desperation in the situation where we're willing to put down our phones, stop looking at Facebook, and get serious about how you come together to solve the problems of this country. Bad behaviors have got to go. Pioneers do this. Most people are paralyzed by obstacles. Pioneers, aka entrepreneurs, get off on them. This is the hardest one. This is the hardest one. I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room thinks you're right. You think you're right, right? You think you're right? Anybody here think they're wrong? No. No. But here's an interesting little factoid. So I read this book on the plane down from Boston. This guy, it's not a great book, but his whole point is that if you want to solve complex problems, you've got to bring together a complexity of thinkers and a complexity of perspectives. That if you try to solve complex problems by bringing together a room full of people that look like you, that act like you, that come from where you come from, you'll fail. You will fail. The second thing that he calls out in the book, which is something I've subscribed to for the last several years, is this idea of psychological safety. The reason why people don't take risks, don't step forward, don't even listen to somebody else's opinion is because they're afraid. Back to Maslow, people are afraid. You're afraid. I'm afraid. Google determined in this significant internal Google study that the number one attribute of high-performing teams is they feel safe. Not just physically safe, emotionally safe, mentally safe, so that they can step forward and they can disagree, politely disagree. They can add on to their boss's idea. There's no hierarchy in psychologically safe organizations. And if I were going to do one thing as the leader of a country or a company or whatever, I would focus on how do I create safety? How do I create a feeling where every human in the organization feels they have somewhere between the right and the responsibility to speak their truth? And the last point, I have this whole thing about the essentiality of intentionality, that we need to really be clear about what we're after before we start taking action. And this is a bit about the looking forward thing, but it's more pointed than that. I think this is the wrong measure of success. I mean, the terrible metaphor I use is I can have perfect blood pressure, I can have a perfect body temperature of 98.6, and I can be dying of cancer. GDP does not reflect the health of a society or the health of an economy. It's just one data point. I don't think the innovation index does it either. This is getting closer, if you know the sustainability goals. I still don't think they're quite right. And so my whole thing about redefining success is based on this quote from Macron. I'm not a Macron junkie, by the way. I just, he's a smart guy. But he said this a few months ago. For society to be sustainable, you have to restore the equality of chances. The equality of chances. And I take that idea and I apply it to the Maslow's hierarchy. And in my simple head, if we were Argentina and there were 800 citizens and every individual felt like they had the capacity, they were motivated, enabled, and supported to realize their full potential individually, then almost necessarily we become a high-performing country. If we allow, encourage, demand that people self-actualize, move up the pyramid, beginning with providing them with safety and security so they have the confidence to keep marching up that pyramid, I think necessarily we have a high-performing country. So I've been playing with this idea called the Latitude Index, which is basically a mashup of the Global Innovation Index, some of the sustainability goals, and some of my own thoughts about a new set of measures about how we gauge the health of the country. This is the path. This is the aspiration, has to be, how do we become pioneers again? How do we get back to that period of prosperity where this country was defined more by self-sacrifice than it was by self-servingness? And the task for you all, like the president said, the president of the Chamber of Commerce said, we got to lead. This is within your control. This is not being done to you. You can do it. But in order to lead effectively, I think you have to affect the way of a pioneer. You have to look to the future. You have to come together around shared adversity. You have to give up your biases and be open to the opinions of other people. And most importantly, you have to recognize this is not about innovation. This is about humanism. That the ability to get this country to where you want to get to is fundamentally about human behavior that begins with your behaviors. Thanks very much.